All right, welcome everyone to the ACA's virtual paddling policy shop talk. My name is Brett Mayer. I'm the acting policy chief for the American Canoe Association. I've been in this role for about 3 years, and I'm excited to be a part of the virtual conference today. The virtual conference today will essentially be in 3 parts. I'll just give a brief introduction here to some of the panelists that are joining us. Each panelist will have 10 or so minutes to sort of talk. We might riff back and forth on a number of policy related issues. And we're going to leave the last half of this call wide open for questions and a chance for audience members to just engage. And hopefully we can give some guidance and some inspiration on how to get involved in some grassroots paddling related activism. So that's our purpose here today. Again, my name is Brett Mayer, acting policy chief for the ACA. Been in this role for 3 years. The type of policy work that the ACA focuses on is obviously paddling centric, and paddling, everything we do is through the lens of concern for paddlers. So we do everything from working towards greater access to rivers, streams, lakes, bays, and coastlines. We think about everything from representing paddlers in meetings in situations that might concern life jacket wear, voter registration laws, paddle sports education standards from state to state, and any kind of representation related to federal and state entities. So the kind of paddling policy work that we do through the ACA is very broad in scope, and the broadness in scope is sort of really, I think, what differentiates us in the kind of paddling policy work we do as an organization. Joining us here on the call today, we've got Adam Kramer, the Executive Director of the Outdoor Alliance. OA is a human-powered consortium of human-powered outdoor rec nonprofits. Adam's going to tell you a little bit more about that when he's up. And we have Norm Gaum. Norm is a deep advocate and protector of all things related to New Mexico rivers. He's a conservator of the Gila, a champion of the Gila National Wild and Scenic Rivers movement. He's heavily involved in stream access, and he sits on the ACA Board of Directors for New Mexico. So welcome, Norm, and welcome, Adam.
Thanks, glad to be here.
Thank you guys for being here.
Thanks.
I'll just take a couple minutes from my end. So again, I've done this role for 3 years now. The way that the ACA has done policy has evolved over the years. And I'm just going to share, 1 or 2 awesome stories from the kind of work that I've had a chance to do. And really, actually, the whole reason that I'm in this role is my relationship with Adam Kramer here. Adam and I are paddling buddies from Great Falls of the Potomac River. And a lot of, as far as paddlers go, there's always conversation when you're out with your buddies paddling, rivers, lakes, ocean, whatever your choice of paddle sport is. But, I grew up and have a background in environmental education and environmental science. And, work paddling with Adam, it naturally lent itself to those kinds of conversations and my own desire to kind of take a greater role in the conservation community. And then Adam's work through OA, and I started out in my policy work by doing a lot of volunteer work with Adam and through OA, and helping develop some regional networks. So human-powered outdoor rec enthusiasts, could really work together to gain the policy, to pursue the policy initiatives that we're going to guarantee access to the places that we love. Adam, you want to hop in?
Yeah, so thanks for the kind introduction, Brett. Again, my name is Adam Kramer. I'm Executive Director of Outdoor Alliance, and I'm really excited and honored, really, to be on this panel with all of you for the ACA Summit. And the panels, it was entitled Success Stories. And I thought that was really thoughtful because, stories are great. Stories are entertaining. They could be fun. They could be scary. But at their best, they could be illuminating, right? They help us understand the world a little better, our place within the world. And it's more than just kind of a documenting what happened, but interpreting what happened. So you have a better understanding, then you could use that wisdom to, chart a course moving forward. So the whole premise of this panel around narrative is really cool. And I've got some stories to share, but I thought it probably made sense to talk a little bit about some of the characters in the stories, including some of the storytellers. And it's true, Brett and I met at the Flake at Great Falls. But let me give you a little more detail about how I ended up at Great Falls in the first place. And that's it was because of work. I'm based in DC, and like a lot of people, they end up in Washington, DC because they're following some kind of job or some kind of career path. And I ended up at a big law firm in Washington, DC, and started paddling. I had this like weird dual existence of doing lawyer stuff for most of the week, hanging out in the library and taking depositions and all that. It's all right. But paddling was like, that was where it was at. It's so much more fun hanging out on the Potomac and heading out to West Virginia. And I was lucky enough to, fall into the Potomac community and did a lot of traveling. And on one of those trips, one of the guys that was on the trip worked at American Whitewater, Jason Robertson. This is way back. And we're drinking beers after running something. And he's like, "Hey, Kramer, you're a lawyer, right?" And that's when I get a little gripped, just waiting, like, all right, how do I explain I'm not that kind of lawyer and I can't help you or your mother-in-law or whatever the problem is? But he went right into the Upper Yakagani. He's like, "We got a problem in the Upper Yak. Would you help us renegotiate this hydropower permit?" And I said, yeah. I mean, I didn't know anything about hydropower. I was an environmental lawyer, but like zero knowledge about hydropower. But I loved the Upper Yak. It was important to me. It was important to my friends. I cared about, the community. And if you asked me to help out on a river like in Colorado, I probably would have said no. I mean, just in all honesty, but it was the Upper Yak and it was personally relevant to me. And I started doing that work pro bono as a volunteer. And that led to all these other opportunities that eventually cascaded into me being the executive director at American Whitewater. So you take paddling and the Upper Yak out of the equation, and I'm not on this panel with all of you. I've got nothing to share. So it's very, that origin is very important. And then, with Outdoor Alliance, Brett, I liked how you characterized it as a consortium. Some people call it an umbrella organization, and I just don't like that imagery, because umbrella suggests that it's like it contains all the organizations, the member organizations. It's really just the opposite. Outdoor Alliance arises out of the 10 more member organizations, and including ACA, which is there from the very beginning, a founding member organization. You got American Whitewater, Winter Wildlands Alliance, the Backcountry Ski Group, Access Fund for climbing, IMBA for mountain biking, International Mountain Bicycling Association. And then we started to expand to include the Mountaineers out in Seattle, the Mazamas in Oregon, Colorado Mountain Club, American Alpine Club, and just recently the Surfride Foundation. So it went from 5 to now 10 member organizations. And I got a pretty small staff of about 6 people that work at Outdoor Alliance, but we've got a team of about 25 policy professionals, including people like Brett and his analogs at all these other organizations. So we're able to bring together these folks that have got deep, deep experience and knowledge and expertise in conserving and protecting the outdoors from all these different perspectives, from climbing and backcountry skiing and paddling. And that is just, has been transformational for the conservation community, from the outdoor community, because we get all these folks together and we focus on conserving and protecting public lands and waters. Like, that's what we do. And we also try to secure sustainable and equitable access to these places. We don't just, all these places have got intrinsic value, of course, but they've got social value. They're relevant to people. And the way that we do this is we turn outdoor enthusiasts, like all of us, into outdoor advocates. How do you leverage that love of place and that affection that you have for these landscapes and the friends that you have to conserve and protect these places and throw down for these places when you need to? And the way that we do it as a collective, we pay attention to what's going on in Congress at the Forest Service, at Fish and Wildlife, all these federal agencies and geographies that are important. Pay attention to what's going on. We try to discern what's most important. And when Brett mentioned, what's relevant for paddling, what's relevant for skiing or surfing, so within that kind of universe of conservation issues, what's most relevant to our community? And that's not really to be provincial or selfish, but you can't do everything, and you might as well focus on the things that you've got a passion for. And then from that bucket of things that are important, we sift through and we find the things where we can move the needle. How can we actually make a difference in the world on these issues that are important to us? And that's really, where all of you come in as ACA members and American Whitewater members and IMBA members, is that we work together to find these opportunities. And I've got a couple of really concrete examples. Some of these stories take a really long time. So what happened over the course of the summer was passed a law that permanently and fully funded the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Generational accomplishment, huge deal. And it took, I've been working on this since day one at Outdoor Alliance. And that we're able to secure that success. It didn't because it was meaningful, and we had a whole team of authentic advocates, people that could come up with a narrative as to what this policy is all about, what it means to kayaking and paddling and backcountry skiing, and tell the story to policymakers and to our community, so that it kind of evolves from a pretty good policy idea to something that's politically existential for some of these lawmakers that were able to pass this over this last year. And it takes a long time. So that's a really good example. The Dingle Act from last year, which is a big lands package, hundreds of thousands of miles protected, square miles protected as wilderness and wild and scenic rivers. That was another big accomplishment that happened recently. And sometimes some of these success stories come up really quickly, and we're able to leverage the passion of the community. And one example is not paddling, but for those of you that ride mountain bikes might be familiar with Slick Rock Trail in Moab. It's one of the most iconic mountain bike resources on the globe. And the current administration is really keen on energy dominance, and they wanted to lease all those oil and gas resources. And somehow they decided to try to put these up for auction, these oil and gas leases right next to, in some cases, underneath Slick Rock Trail. And we caught wind of that and mobilized the community and the agency that was in charge of this, Bureau of Land Management. We were very precise and said, not the best idea. And they flinched, and they just said, you know what, you're right. We're not going to do this at Slick Rock Trail. We're sorry. And so sometimes these things take years and years and years, these success stories. Sometimes you seize on an opportunity and it happens, just like that. But you're only able to dip into these opportunities when you've got this collective effort of which ACA is a part, and all the other member organizations. We've got a different viewpoint of things in the particulars, but our values are the same, and there's some efficiency there, and it's exciting. And the last thing I'll say is that we've got a pretty good design at Outdoor Alliance. Why are you laughing, Brett?
I have a work colleague, sorry.
Oh.
You didn't know I was on a call.
All right. We got a good design. We've got pretty good policy chops. We've got good relationships with policymakers, but the fuel that drives all this work is all of you. It's the membership that when Brett sends an action alert out, says, you know what, this is important. You folks in Wisconsin, can you drop a line to your senators? And then you guys do, and gals do. And then the lawmakers are like, I think maybe I'll have to think twice about doing this, or maybe this is a really good idea. The ability to connect these ideas with policymakers, inform their decision making. It's all you guys. So I'll just end with an expression of gratitude. You've been doing it for years, and keep it up.
Thanks so much for that, Adam. I really appreciate that. There's so many great takeaways from that. It kind of reminded me of, one story that I just really want to share before I kind of turn things over to Norm here. One thing I want to say is really the main point of this, of us being panelists in this call, is really to inspire people that are listening to this call to, don't wait, right? If you feel passion and connection to a place, like, love that place and act in a way, right? Like, you have a voice by being a member of the ACA, or you have a voice by being a member of another human-powered rec organization. And you can really, through your membership, you can utilize your voice to sort of bring attention to the places that you really love and care about so much. And, for me, this is just one example of a synthesis of those things. But when I first kind of stepped into this role, the very next day, the first thing that happened was a situation on, at that time, my home river, which is the Potomac. Adam and I share that in common. And so there was, without going into too much detail, there was an access situation on the Potomac at a really popular location that paddlers were using. And it was a lot of paddlers, everyone from class 1 to class 5 paddlers, used this spot as a put-in. And for without going again into the details, there was a variety of reasons that access to this spot was going to be shut down potentially for a number of years. And this is one of those examples of an issue that it literally, like, it galvanized the community overnight. And people were just, they were, the paddling community was such a special and important place to that local paddling community that all of these different organizations really came together, ACA being one of them, to sort of find
that with Brett frozen, then I'm going to step in and start my presentation. My name is Norman Gom. I'm very pleased to be here. I want to talk about some things that mean a lot to me, and let me share my screen with you and get this going. There are two issues in New Mexico that I've been heavily involved in, and I'm going to talk to you about both of them. The first is protection of the Wild Gila River from a water development project that dates all the way back to 1968. The most recent attempt to develop this wild portion of the Gila River started in 2004. There were 3 previous attempts, all by the Bureau of Reclamation. And I'm very pleased to be able to say that in June of this year, the water developers gave up on this. This particular photograph I took in March of this year. We took great pleasure floating by any number of proposed dam sites that the State Water Development Agency or local proponents had proposed. This happened to be the first one that was proposed in 2014. I am having control issue. There we go. The other issue is New Mexico public stream access, which is currently in litigation. This photograph shows a barricade on the Pecos River that was recently erected by a Texas oil man, a very rich oil man, who has a second or third or 10th home on the Pecos River in New Mexico. And after a rule was passed by the State Game Commission, this barricade appeared on the river. It is a life and safety hazard, and I think a death threat to an unsuspecting paddler. But back to the Gila. And I want to echo what Brett said and Adam. And I'll do that with a little story about the Gila River. Aldo Leopold, in 1924, protected the headwaters of the Gila River as the USA's first wilderness area. He had been employed by the Forest Service after graduating from Yale as a forester, and his job was to ride the mountains of Arizona and New Mexico to estimate the standing board feet of timber. After, when he was older and roads had encroached over most of the areas that he had explored as a young man for the Forest Service, the headwaters of the Gila River remained roadless, and he wrote a proposal just a few pages long to the Forest Service management, who accepted it and set this area aside as a roadless area. It later was protected as the first official wilderness when the Wilderness Act was passed in 1964. I grew up in New Mexico, and I was drawn to the Gila Wilderness as a young man. I did a lot of backpacking. And of course, New Mexico being the desert and me not being very familiar with rivers at all, it was a really unexpected thing when I found I had to cross the flooded Gila River in the spring when I was backpacking on spring break. And I remember crossing with one of my friends, and we were holding on to each other in the 3-point stance and making our way across the flooded river, hoping we weren't going to get swept away with our backpacks. And I remember looking upstream and deciding I'm going to run that river. And only a few years later, I bought a canoe and did that. I've had dozens of 3-day trips down this wilderness river. And in 2014, I became heavily engaged, virtually full-time, in the fight to protect the Gila River from this latest water development scheme. The great thing to say about this is the pending Gila Wild and Scenic River Bill would provide permanent protection for the wild river while leaving the little agricultural valleys where there are opponents to wild and scenic designation, would leave them completely alone. I might mention here, Adam mentioned a couple of pieces of landmark legislation that passed. We in New Mexico are very proud of our senators, Senator Heinrich and Udall, who were instrumental in getting those laws passed this year. But my real point here is that I think that the more people who are engaged in paddling and the more people that we can get in our paddling clubs, the better able we're going to be to protect these rivers, because as Adam said, we protect what we love. And I know that I would not have engaged in this long and arduous fight had I not grown to literally love the Gila River, and I truly treasure it. Part of my job in this panel, I think, is to talk about maybe lessons learned and how to share that with people who'd like to get involved in protecting their waterways and rivers and paddling opportunities. And I've looked back on the battle for the Gila River, thought about it, and came up with a few bullets to describe what I think were crucially important. First of all is we were able to gain political support from elected officials, some elected officials. It was a very divided battle, but we worked hard to get elected officials on our side. One of the real assets for our fight was that we made relentless use of public records and open government laws. And New Mexico has strong laws. Along the way in that battle, since my engagement in 2014, I filed a lawsuit over the state water development agencies awarding contracts to respond to our opposition, but they did it in secret instead of publicly, which was against the law. That brought them into a very bad light. I was amazed when I found out that the water development agencies were not telling the truth. And of course, use of the public records and experts revealed that, but we helped in the fight in bringing the real facts and science, to light, and emphasizing that the story was not as they were telling it. Our team included people who were really good at public communications. I don't claim that, but we had great people who were handling that part of it. Another very important point is that we had a core team, actually 4 people who worked on this virtually full time for quite a number of years. But the real strength was in our engaged supporters. We had an engaged community locally and across the state. Our paddling club was part of that. And so at the most basic level, people who are engaged in protecting paddling opportunities in rivers and natural places can do that by joining clubs and just getting involved in those activities. And then the last key opposition factor, I think, is our perseverance. We just kept at it, and it took years, but we were able to prevail. Brett asked me to share lessons learned, and I kind of did that with the previous slide, but I'm going to try to maybe bring it down to a different level here. Partners were essential. Partners individually with stakeholders and involved activists, with non-governmental organizations, with elected officials who were friendly to us. We had to have a coalition in order to beat the government. Our biggest hurdle was our opponent's seemingly limitless resources. They had a government checkbook and they spent $16 million. And at the end, they had absolutely nothing to show for it. But we had a very limited budget. And so our answer to their checkbook was our dedication and our perseverance. ACA wanted to know what advice that I might have for members who would like to get involved in their local public policy issues. So I've kind of boiled that down. At the very basic level, you get involved, you seek allies, and you get organized. In our case, non-governmental organizations were key partners. We engaged sympathetic press members so that we got good news stories. We planned, we engaged the public. We put out a lot of communications, and we would go back and plan again as situations changed. We took the time to understand the facts and the science and the economics. And it turned out that the government, I really hate to say this, it pains me to say this, but they were not telling the truth. And we were able to credibly, I believe, counter their misinformation and disinformation about the need for this project and about its economic returns. Again, if you have open public records laws and open government laws, that can be extremely helpful. We were able, with the strong laws in New Mexico, to get their correspondence and to get their draft reports. And I'm not sure that we would have prevailed without being able to do that. And very importantly, you need to find a good lawyer who wants to help if you're going to go toe-to-toe with government agencies who have seemingly limitless resources. The other issue I wanted to report briefly on is the public stream access legal action in New Mexico. And again, partners and lawyers were essential in us taking the fight to the rich privatizers in New Mexico. The short story is that our game commission, under an unfriendly administration and with lots of campaign contributions involved, passed a rule that would allow New Mexico's public rivers running through private property to be declared off limits to the public. We believe that's unconstitutional, and we sued to do that. This is another photograph of the barricade that the Texas oil man put up. By the way, almost all of our privatizers are out-of-state absentee rich landowners, almost all of them Texas oil and gas interests. And then the signs show the yellow sign is an official sign that the Game Commission required, but the private property owner took it a step further, saying no watercraft operation. And this is a public river. Of course, the barricade makes that impossible. Back in 1983, the New Mexico State Parks Division published this guidebook, which for years was my guide to New Mexico rivers. I tried for a number of years to boat all the rivers that were in this guidebook. The absentee landowners subverted the New Mexico Constitution. 4 river segments that are in this guidebook now have privatized segments with barricades. In March of this year, we sued in the New Mexico Supreme Court with a petition for a writ asking the Supreme Court to declare the Game Commission's rule unconstitutional. We weren't certain that they would accept our case in order to sue directly in the Supreme Court. Takes very special circumstances, but in fact, they have accepted the case and we await their decision. The petitioners in this case, the organizations that sued, are all non-governmental organizations. And they include my local paddling club, the Adobe Whitewater Club, whose motto is "For the Love of Rivers." It includes the New Mexico Wildlife Federation and Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And I put a web site address up there, a web page address for the Adobe Whitewater Club pages on this litigation. The group that's involved in this, representing paddlers, is wider than just the Adobe Whitewater Club. It includes the American Canoe Association, the New Mexico River Outfitters Association, and American Whitewater. And we've obtained financial support from, for our litigation from these organizations. In summary, in order to successfully engage in policymaking that cuts against our interest, I have some advice. I think that factors in success means reaching out and obtaining relationships with partners who can really understand and articulate the issues and who have supportive public policy positions. In all of these cases, it's more than individuals. National NGOs are critical participants and stakeholders, as are a coalition of local organizations. And of course, without our grassroots supporters, we have very little power. Effective communications with the press and the public are quite important. We have to engage our politicians and elected officials, appointed officials. Fundraising is essential, and so are good lawyers. If you're thinking about getting started as an activist, I think you don't have to have all of these things. The most important thing is to have a desire to protect special places and things that you treasure. Get involved, do your homework, seek allies, get organized, make a plan, get work done, adjust, and repeat. And that can be done over, and well, you have to do that over and over again in a long battle like the one we just won. We hope to also win the New Mexico Legal Stream Access battle. Thanks, you guys, for letting me share these experiences with the American Canoe Association.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Norm. It's wide open for questions from any of the participants on this call, and we can all kind of join in answering some of the questions that participants might have. So fire away. So we have a question: what makes a river public? Anyone want to take that question? What makes a river public? Kramer?
Norm, I'll address that. I'm Robert Levin, the state director for American Canoe Association. In New Mexico, we have a little bit different circumstance than some of the other states in that our state constitution stipulates that all waters belong to the public. Norm, you may want to clarify that a little more.
Oh, I don't know that we need to clarify it. In New Mexico, rivers are public. I think throughout the West, rivers are public. I mean, I got personally engaged in the stream access issue when I was run off a river at gunpoint, the Taylor River in Colorado, years and years ago. That particular incident ended up with the gunman leaving in the back of a sheriff's vehicle with his hands handcuffed behind him, and we pressed charges and he did time in jail. That's more of a fun story than an answer to what makes a river public question. I think it's really a matter of law. I'm not sure that I know of any private rivers anywhere. So I don't know.
There's one way to think about it is if the river or part of the river is on public land, like forest, the national forest or BLM or state public land, then it's public. But as Robert mentioned, there are other, factors such as the state constitution. So yeah, that's how I think about it.
But in New Mexico's case, the privatizers tried to get a law changed through the New Mexico legislature that would have allowed them to privatize rivers that run through public land. The law passed, but it was totally gutted, did nothing by the time it was passed. At least that's what our lawsuit says, and I believe that that's true. But in this case, the people who own the private land claim that they have the ability to ban the public from the rivers that go through their land. We disagree. That's why we're suing.
So a couple of questions are starting to trickle in. Let's see. One of the questions was sort of ACA related into sort of the policy work that ACA does. And someone had asked, why is it that they hear organizations like OA and maybe American Whitewater mentioned a lot more than the ACA when it comes to sort of paddling related policy issues? So there's a couple reasons for that, I think, right now. One, a lot of the policy work that I think the ACA does is focused on issues that are a lot more locally and state focused, like what's happening in New Mexico. Although these issues in New Mexico have actually gotten quite a bit of press in some national publications. Robert, can you remind me what some of the publications have been that have kind of mentioned some of the work that you all have done out there?
Yeah, we've had the original article that was done was in The Guardian. And then there was it's not right in front of me. Norm, can you step in on that?
There's a great article in Huffington Post. If you go to the website that I showed on my slide, and maybe we ought to put that up again so people could copy it, or I'll tell you what, I'll put it in the chat. There's also, well, this Huffington Post article that was recent is a great one. And then there's another interesting article that reveals the extent that campaign contributions have played in this, I think, in the Center for Western Priorities publication called Money Trails. But there's links to all of the relevant articles on the Adobe Whitewater Club's website.
I think there was another really good article that was, I'm not sure who put it out, entitled Trout, Lawyers, and Money, that came out sometime last year, which was very telling of the story.
Guys, another short answer to that question is just American Whitewater's policy mission is razor focused on access, and a lot of what the ACA does just falls into a broader bucket. So a lot of times I'm spending, a lot of my times working on like voter registration issues in Tennessee, and I'm not sure if Andrea White's out there on this call, but she'd be one to certainly jump in on some of the things that we've worked on there. But I know Hunter's out there, and he might be able to speak to that as well. Other questions that have kind of come up: how does the legal status of navigable waterway come into play? Anybody want to talk about the legal status of what a navigable waterway is?
Well, I could say that the privatizers in New Mexico claim that they have a right to privatize rivers that are non-navigable. But when they submitted their applications, they submitted documentation from before New Mexico gained statehood, that it was a statement by a territorial governor that claimed that no New Mexico rivers were navigable. I think that maybe speaking more broadly, when states were recognized by the United States as states, if riverways were recognized by the federal government as navigable at the time of statehood, then the bed and banks were transferred to the states in public ownership. If not, they became part of the land that was available for being patented by individuals. And maybe Adam has more information on that, but that's my understanding.
Yeah, no, that sounds consistent with my understanding, Norm. Another aspect of navigability is the applicability of the Clean Water Act. You know, it's been a lot of work that we've been doing with ACA and AW at Outdoor Alliance to defend the Clean Water Act and the regulations that tear off of the legislation. And there's been some argument as to whether the Clean Water Act doesn't apply to ephemeral streams. But you know, it's all connected, right? You know, everybody realizes that, so it's kind of a specious argument. But in any event, if river is navigable, then it's covered by the Clean Water Act, and that's a good thing. So it's not just access, but water quality and health of an ecosystem.
So Adam, that might be something people are interested in too. So that Clean Water Rule of 2015 and how that, I don't know if I just missed that, but just sort of how that changed the nature of like what waters were deemed navigable and what was covered under the Clean Water Act.
Yeah, it's all, you know, it's a combination of court rulings and whoever's in the White House and deciding what the regulations are going to be. So, you know, the most recent regulation of the current administration is probably not optimal from a Clean Water Act standpoint, but that could change with the courts, and also if there's a change in administration. You might have a different viewpoint of the importance or application of the Clean Water Act and the related regulations. And you know, it's always a moving target. Like Norm's counsel about just, you know, revisiting what's going on and keeping it up it's important, because you know, we live in a democracy and leadership changes and priorities get shifted around. You know, for example, NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, bedrock environmental law from 69 or 70, that enables visibility, public visibility into major government actions that could impact the environment. And there were some new regulations proposed and finalized that essentially gut NEPA and cut out the public in a pretty substantial way, and tell the agencies are like, hey, you know what? Cumulative impacts, climate, don't worry about it. Not important, shouldn't be part of the analysis. And it seems all very kind of acronym laden and technical, but you know, it all goes back to the fact that these are public lands and waters, which means that you've got a right to be there and a right to have a say in how they're managed for now and into the future. So, you know, hopefully the NEPA regulations will be revisited and we'll be able to dial things back to where they were. So just the need to continually pay attention to what's going on and then find opportunities to weigh in is important. And that's why, you know, membership in the ACA, it empowers people like Brett and his colleagues to know what's going on and then share those opportunities with the membership, with the broader community, so you could take action and like bend things back to the way that you want it, you know? So vigilance is important, but also, you know, having people like Brett to like connect all the dots so the community could flex when they need to.
We've got some really, thanks for that, Adam. We've
Sure.
got some other really cool questions coming in. We've got one on bank easements. So this person is from Colorado, and they're seeing a lot of signs going up on the Gunnison River marking private property. And I know this is like a concern of a lot of river paddlers, but kind of what are the rules about, you know, getting out if you need to portage, or how far can you go? Anyone want to chat about that? Bank easement rules and what kind of constitutes public or private along the riverway.
Well, I'll give that a shot. I think that the ownership of the bed and banks is a state law issue, and it'll vary from place to place. Our paddling club has always emphasized that if properties are posted, you know, that you give those postings respect and you just paddle on through. But for safety, if you have to portage or scout, you know, we consider that part of running the river and try to do it as unobtrusively as possible. We also try really hard to keep our rivers picked up and clean. You know, if you see stuff on the river that somebody else has left behind, you take it with you. But I think that the real answer to that question is it resides in state law. In Colorado, you know, as I said, I was run off the river at gunpoint on the Taylor River in Colorado years ago. My understanding is that the bed and banks are privately owned and you can float through. But I also know that the paddling practice is if you have to scout or portage, you just do it.
Thanks, Norm. Again, another related question. This one's kind of closer to my heart because this has to do with Johns Creek in Virginia. But someone's bringing up the issue of that unique rule in Virginia where there's landowners claiming that they own river bottom because of a law dating back to the King's Grant. It's my understanding that actually was overturned in court in Virginia, and that access on Johns Creek has actually been open for, I think, about over 5 years now. And that's a story. I started my paddling in Central Virginia, and I'm a Virginia paddler at heart. And I had to wait quite a number of years to actually get on that creek, and followed that case closely. So we have another question. Let's see. Any particular advice as to water access improvements and/or acquisitions? So this is someone's thinking about, you know, how to gain more access to rivers. I'm assuming lakes and other waterways. How do you acquire land, or how do you improve access points? Which is, anyone can hop in there. There's a lot of complexity there, actually. I think you might be muted.
I was muted. Thank you. I think it's really important to begin with your paddling club and perhaps even your state ACA to begin the partnering opportunities with the various access agencies. We recently offered partnership with the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, and they have the control of many of the access points along the Middle Rio Grande in their bosque locations. Those are forested locations. Most of them are gated. Some of them come under the administration of other government agencies as well, but they offered to partner with us. We also work closely here where I live with the Army Corps of Engineers, and we've been bugging them for years, and we may be successful in the future of providing a universal paddling launch at that location. So I really think it really depends on starting the communication and being rather persistent about it. As Norm said in his own activism suggestions, persistency pays off. I don't think anybody wants to eliminate, especially when there's a lot of public access areas, to eliminate paddling. I think that falls more into the private landowner arena.
It's,
To add to that, My understanding is the Great American Outdoors Act and the Land and Water Conservation Fund actually provides funds to acquire access. And I know there's a project to acquire what's now private access to a seldom run portion of the Gila River in New Mexico, even, quite remote. The takeout's on private land, and I know when I've run it, you take a chance and you hope that the guy's not there with his rifle when you get to the takeout because you're stuck. Anyway, there are plans to acquire that for public use with government funds.
When this comes to mind for me, if you are dealing with a local issue where access or acquisition is an issue, one thing that I would encourage folks to really think about in the paddling community is thinking very specifically, what kind of access does a paddler need? Because a lot of times what I see, and this has gone on in Tennessee, I've worked with Andrea on this, but just the conflation of the paddling community with other recreational communities that require different kinds of access points. The fishing community, boat launches, paddlers often don't need that kind of, grandiose access that requires large capital expenditures up front. And, there's just a lot of money that goes into those things. So, other examples, American Whitewater, when it comes to sort of, whitewater specific access points, they've actually kind of pooled funds to own the land, at the access point. An example would be the Watauga, and then also working with Friendsville and the Upper Yaak, things like that to sort of, get, when the community can focus in on the specific needs, again, like creating those kinds of partnerships and having that voice is incredibly effective. But we have to work together to really articulate that. That's super important. So I wanted to throw that out there as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of really wonderful wisdom from Robert and Norm on this. And to your examples, Brett, there's always somebody that's going to be in charge, right? For like a section of river, the public land, if it's on the Forest Service, like forest supervisor or a landowner or state, there's like, and it might be multiple people, but just getting a dialogue started with whoever happens to be in charge and doing the research beforehand to figure that out could be, completely transformational just to have that dialogue. And also, Robert, when you were talking about, having a collective presence, it's not just showing up saying, hey, can I have access to this river? But if you're speaking on behalf of the paddling community and explain, give a sense of scale of to what you're looking for and who you are, a lot of this stuff can be resolved, over a handshake. You don't have to get lawyers involved at all. I mean, sometimes you do, but just getting that dialogue started is essential. And when Norm was talking about the Great American Outdoors Act, that's like, I can't overstate what a big deal this is. I mean, when I mentioned earlier the Land and Water Conservation Fund, that was part of the Great American Outdoors Act. So basically, you got like a ton of oil and gas in the Gulf of Mexico, and it's being pulled out, and all those energy resources are public. They belong to the public. And back in the 60s, if Congress thought, hey, if we're going to pull all these resources out of the Gulf of Mexico, there should be a royalty because they belong to the people of the United States. And what if we redirect some fraction of that to conserve and protect the outdoors and provide for access to the outdoors? And they said, all right, so up to $900 million. And remember, this is back in 64. So $900 million is a really big number, even bigger back then. And they said, Congress, you could redirect up to $900 million every year. And over the last 50 years or so, they've done it twice. And it's every year, it's like this, cage match to figure out how much of this money could we get into this fund, because as Norm, points out, you use those resources for access. And now with the Great American Outdoors Act, it's fully funded every year and it's permanent. So every year it's $900 million going into this fund. And the challenge historically has been like, how do we get the number to be big every year? Now we've got like a dog catching the bumper situation. We've got this money, we have a responsibility to figure out how to spend it. So, leveraging local knowledge from ACA chapters and members to figure out what your needs are. I mean, there is money on the table, and I don't want to create an expectation that, there's somebody just, doing this for river access money. But if we're organized about it, we could direct, a modest amount of those resources, as Brett points out. There's not, our access points aren't that expensive, and solve a lot of these problems. And the other big part about America's Great Outdoors is that deferred maintenance, and it's like fixing, roads and infrastructure that has not been kept up on public lands. And in the beginning, the focus was just on the Park Service, and ACA and all the other OA member organizations were instrumental in diversifying those funds to go not just to the Park Service, but the Forest Service and BLM, Fish and Wildlife Service. So it's a huge, and that number is $1.9 billion each year for 5 years to spend on deferred maintenance. So in terms of acquiring new places through easements or acquisitions, and then funding the infrastructure, there's money on the table that we had a pretty heavy hand in. All of us had a heavy hand in securing it. And now we got to pivot to figuring out, how do we direct some of those resources to, enhance paddling opportunities. So it's a good problem to have.
Right. We are, Kelsey, how are we doing on time? Do we have time for one more question?
Hi, I need to start the next in 3 minutes. So if you can do it in 3, awesome.
Awesome. Thanks. All right. Well, I'll do it since we only have 3 minutes. Any final thoughts from Norm, Adam, or Robert as we sort of kind of wind down our 3 minutes? This has been quite enjoyable. Thanks, guys.
No, thank you.
Thanks all you guys. And Norm, man, you're a hero. I love your story in the Gila. It's good stuff, man. Keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks so much, Robert. Everyone that's listening, thanks for your questions. I did my best to get to everything. I may have not have gotten to one or two. You can always email me direct at beamericancanoe.org, and I'm happy to chat offline about any of these things. Welcome your call anytime.
One other quick thing, I did post the Adobe Whitewater Club stream access link. So Brett, perhaps there's a way that book could become more accessible to the conference attendees.
We can make that accessible to conference attendees. That'll be on the What's New bar, and Kelsey will have that up probably within the next 30 minutes. Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thanks a lot. Do some good work out there. See you on the river.